Hello, and welcome to the Health GoLive Webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Microsoft. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Ahuti Ray.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Ahuti Rai. I am an advisor in the health innovation space, working with early stage companies, providers, and investors, and I look forward to our discussion today. So I expect that, like me, you're here today because you also are excited, but perhaps also a bit curious, maybe a bit nervous about this rapid development that we are seeing with the use of AI in healthcare. So these technologies, particularly agentic AI and generative AI, are opening up a whole new range of possibilities, and we're experiencing this in the real world beyond the lab. But they also bring a responsibility, a real sense of responsibility to ensure that our healthcare delivery systems remain safe, ethical, and effective. And that's what today's session is all about. It's really about finding that balance between how we embrace innovation while keeping patient safety, clinical oversight, and ethical considerations at the forefront in everything that we do. So we are going to be talking about some of the opportunities and live cases, but also some of the challenges that go with it. So our hope is that you will leave with practical insights to help you navigate this space, which is, fast-paced and ever-evolving, and that you can navigate this with confidence and with some clarity as well. So today's webinar is composed of 3 parts. We are going to start with a presentation by Hadass Britton on the topic of responsible AI and considerations. And we will then have a panel discussion, which Hadass will also join, and also we will be joined by Andreas Miller and Dr. Zvi Sheleg. We will also have time for a Q&A session with all of you, so please do use the Q&A feature that we have in this webinar. I'll be keeping an eye on the questions. We'll come to them at the end. We may have some live responses within that Q&A whilst the webinar is also going on. So with that, let's get going. Let's get started with some introductions. And I would like to invite our presenter and panelists to turn on their videos and their microphones. And let's do some introductions. So Andreas, if I may ask you to go first and then hand over to Zvi, and then leading to Hadass, who can then take us into our presentation, which is the first part of the webinar.
Certainly. So, hi everyone. I'm Andreas Miller, Head of Group AI Engineering at Campia Group Medical. So I've spent more than 3 decades turning technology into real-world value. I started as a software developer. This is still my first love. Then moved through leadership positions, including running an enterprise services for Hewlett-Packard in the entire Middle East, and later serving as a CEO at Attendees. I joined CGM 6 years ago, and today I'm part of the leadership team there, building or guiding through our AI transformation with direct responsibility for our central AI platforms and services. My mission is to synchronize healthcare, giving doctors more time for their patients. And every AI service release pushes us toward that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. My name is Zvi Sheleg. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and Chief Medical Officer of the GoLive Medical Center, which is the second largest hospital in Israel, northern of Tel Aviv. So perhaps you've heard of it, and if not, you have now. I've been in charge of the innovation program, probably the founder and the leader of our innovation program in the hospital, and I would like to share with you some insights regarding some collaborations we did with Microsoft. I have another hobby, I say. I'm an ophthalmologist, still practice, still active, performing cataract surgeries. Hopefully will never stop again. And my mission in my hospital is to make sure that all doctors are acquainted with artificial intelligence and the products that are available, to make sure they are innovative and be part of developing innovation in the hospital, in the health tech industry in Israel. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So AI is evolving exponentially. How can we leverage AI to solve some of healthcare's largest problems? My name is Hadass Bitran. I run the Microsoft Health and Life Sciences AI Services Organization. It is a multidisciplinary R&D organization, multidisciplinary involving software engineering, data science, product management, but also medical science, which is our doctors, nurses, medical scientists who specialize in working with us. And together, all of us are building AI services for health and life sciences. As a team, we have shipped multiple products and cloud services for the healthcare industry that are already today serving thousands of customers and millions of end users all around the world.
We can see your slides, Hada, so you're good to go. And just so that everyone is aware, we will send the slides out afterwards as well.
So indeed, AI evolving exponentially, and it would be great if we could leverage AI to solve some of healthcare's biggest problems. And healthcare systems all around the world are facing challenges, overload of increasing demand, burnout of clinicians, clinical staff shortage. It's a worldwide problem. And generative AI can help. If we do this in a responsible way, generative AI can help with some of the biggest problems in healthcare. And healthcare is multimodal. We have text, we have structured data, we have imaging, we have videos, we have audio. This is something that generative AI can work with. So it could help us solve some of the biggest problems in healthcare if we do this responsibly. And we already see today healthcare systems that are starting to implement and deploy many use cases that are powered by generative AI. Things like patient engagement, decision support for clinical staff, ambient clinical intelligence, and healthcare agents. So let's talk about agents and agentic AI. Copilot agents are AI assistants, typically are using generative AI to optimize business processes and to do productivity tasks. And Copilot agents can vary in how complex they are. They could do simpler things like retrieve informations. They could complete tasks or execute workflows. And they can also orchestrate other agents. Agentic AI typically refers to agents that can operate autonomously. And agentic AI can involve orchestrating multiple agents. But Copilot agents in healthcare have special needs. We need Copilot agents that can reuse healthcare-specific pre-built features and use cases. We want to use generative AI to empower patients and clinicians, but we want updated, credible knowledge. And we want to be able to deploy those Copilot agents in healthcare safely and responsibly. And we will be back to this safely and responsibly in a minute. But first, let's see a couple of examples. Agents come, they could come for medical professionals, they could come for patient experiences. In those examples, we see an agent for medical professionals that can answer questions about relevant guidelines or clinical information from credible sources. and an agent for patient that maybe helps the patient complete some administrative self-serve tasks, or provides information, or explains what the doctor just said in simpler language. So those are some examples. But how can we create agents safely and responsibly in healthcare? And this is where the healthcare specialized safeguards come in. Healthcare is sensitive. It has unique complexities, unique compliance regulations. We realized we need healthcare specialized safeguards to verify the quality and the accuracy of generative AI. And those come in several categories, in three categories roughly. Healthcare chat safeguards, clinical safeguards, and compliance safeguards. Those safeguards would typically be built using deterministic AI models that are fine-tuned for healthcare. Let's see a few examples. In this example, we see a response from generative AI. We see that there is a credit to the source of the response. There's a disclaimer for transparency that this came from AI. There is attribution to evidence with a citation in the text for provenance. That evidence went through clinical evidence verification and was also detected as relevant for the answer. And on top of everything, we have a clinical code in the answer that we want to validate. So those are some examples for things that would appear in a chat. Another type of safeguards are the clinical safeguards. Recently, we've also released a set of clinical safeguards as private preview, and here are some examples. Clinical hallucinations and omissions detection helps us to detect hallucinations and omission in the responses of the AI system against the grounding data with clinical context awareness, because you need the clinical context to understand if it's really an omission or if it's really an hallucination, for example. Clinical provenance allows detecting the exact source of certain claims from the grounding data facts. Clinical conflict detection, for example, would identify potential conflict within clinical documentation that was generated by AI, for example. Clinical coding validation would verify that clinical codes that appear in AI responses actually exist, that they are real, and that they are relevant to the context of that. So those are some examples. And those safeguards are used in our healthcare agent today because they are very much needed. In summary, generative AI has huge potential, but we must remember it's not a substitute for human judgment, expertise, or responsibility. It is a tool that we need to use wisely and ethically. We need to be aware of the risks, and we need to be critical of the quality of the generated content. And we need the human in the loop. And this is why we apply our responsible AI core principles to everything we do and all technologies we create in Microsoft. And those come in several pillars: fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, accountability. Each one of those are actually representative of a checklist of processes that we as an R&D team have to go through in order to ship products. Those checklists involve rigorous processes. We have to make submissions of evidence for all sorts of evaluations that we have done in order to make sure that we meet the responsible AI core principles. I hope this provides some context for the next part of the webinar, and I'm handing back to you, Nicole.
I'll jump in here, Hadass, and let's take us straight into the panel. So thank you very much for that presentation, Hadass. I think it gives us all a common understanding around this topic, and we can now launch into some specific questions around this. So if I can just actually pick up on pretty much one of your last slides, right? So in this, you outlined Microsoft's responsible AI considerations. So these were like the core principles that you presented. So are you able to give us an example where a responsible AI practice, one or all of those core principles that you presented to us, actually changed the design or functionality of a product?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and there are many examples. I'll just give a few examples. First of all, the clinical safeguards themselves were born out of the necessity, out of the need for reliability and safety of the AI system, a whole new functionality that we added into our agents. Also around safety, when building models for healthcare, we realized we need content safety that is different, that is healthcare specific, because healthcare can include, for example, in the clinical data or the clinical history that the model would be processing. There could be mentions of body parts. There could be mentions of violent events in the history of the patient. So content safety needs to be different because the context is healthcare. So under the core principle of safety, we had to develop a different content safety feature. And last but not least, I'll just mention a third example in the context of transparency and explainability of the AI system. It's something we sometimes refer to as groundedness. We realize we need to add verified evidence to any answer that our agent is providing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Hadass. I think I'll take some of this then, what you've just shared with us, into a question perhaps for you, Zvi, if that's fine. So as a physician leading innovation, I guess what are some of the AI use cases that you're looking to enable? And, in particular, perhaps through your partnership with Microsoft, and also, I guess, keeping in mind some of these core principles where Hadass has just given us some examples, and how that perhaps has, I guess, swayed your focus on the use cases as well.
Yes, great question, Udi. I think that the main thing for me as a physician and as a chief innovation officer is to address this question not only in my hospital's perspective, but in a larger, broader view. And I think AI should tackle especially the pains of the health system. And I'd like to name a few. Hadass mentioned some of them in her presentation. So first and foremost is the lack of personnel, mostly specifically doctors. Also the high cost of employment of healthcare providers and staff. And the fact is that many physicians have a high burnout rate, and that is because of the, I'd say, time-consuming, tedious tasks that follow any physician's day-to-day encounter with a patient. And last but not least is probably the patient's journey. I think billing is very important, but also the way to negotiate the information in a familiar language where the patient can understand what's going on. So if you look at the technology perspective for years now, for decades, I would say, most of the FDA-approved agents that hospitals are using are in the imaging department. There's about 1,000 of these, and 70% of them come from imaging. And that will continue to expand to more indications. And obviously, pathology is down the road. And I know that many projects are still working on it because it's very delicate and very specific. But LLM has changed the way we look at the values that AI products can supply in the health system. I'd say that the partnership with Microsoft allowed us to understand that we can tackle these challenges. And I don't want to talk about products, API products like Copilot Dragon or Copilot Studio that are designed and dedicated for the healthcare system. But I think that to me as a doctor in my clinic, one of the most things I hate to do is start typing out any meeting with a patient, which is obvious. And an application with voice recognition powered by an AI agent that summarizes the meeting and sends the referring physician the proper summarization of this meeting, and a different one for the patient is highly appreciative. It is already safe, very safe and very fast and efficient. And I have to say that safety for us doctors is the highest priority, because if you use an agent and it hallucinates, like Hadass said, and then you might find yourself endangering or harming a patient. And this is a no-go for us. Once a doctor sees an agent that gives the wrong answer or invents something, a new diagnosis, or takes a wrong one, that's enough. This will stop the market from using that software or agent.
Yeah, incredible answer. Thank you. That was so comprehensive. And actually, we've got some questions around ambient scribes, which is one of the use cases there that you were describing. So we'll come on to that towards the end. Andreas, if I may bring you into the conversation, and I think sticking with the theme around use cases, I'd like to just bring your perspective into this. So we've heard there from Svi around 70% really being around imaging, maybe pathology is coming up. Are we gravitating towards use cases where we can really be sure around safety? Absolutely reasonable if we are, why wouldn't we? But what use cases are you working on enabling? So is CGM, and what role does your partnership with Microsoft play in enabling some of those use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the comment from Sri about what he's annoyed about. He would love to make this more automatic. And I think this is a role where we can really help. As a leading healthcare solution provider in Europe and also gaining some speed or momentum in the US, we offer such a solution. So at the moment, we have already two in the market, which is having exactly that, the technology as a foundation, where we have speech to text. So we use ambient AI exactly as a doctor's patient conversation, summarize it, extract the necessary information, and make it so that the doctor then has no time to spend anymore on this documentation stuff, but can focus more on the patient, as our mission is saying. The other thing is, if you have ever tried to get a doctor's appointment, that's also something very interesting. So you call a doctor's office. Here we offer a phone assistant, which just takes your calls and really talks to you. So it's not only an answering machine, it's an automated answering machine where you really drop your requests, and the machine is talking to you like a real person and figuring out what you actually want, and then putting it into an asynchronous task, also enabling our systems in the background to maybe issue a prescription or something, which then is in an asynchronous way for the doctor's office to process, which again, asynchronous mode of working for the doctor's office brings a lot of time and efficiency. And of course, we are here again in the situation that we don't want to harm anyone. So here you always have the oversight for human being, and that's so keep the human in the loop is a super important thing and non-negotiable. But whatever you can automate in terms of documentation, that is where it is actually better. So it is faster and better as what we have today. And that's where we are really working on it. So the next level of systems is where we bring it to the clinics and then have this clinical documentation assist, and doing then the same thing for the hospitals. That's where we are driving it. What we are shying a little bit away at the moment, where we need to do lots of research all together, is also with regulation, is real clinical decision support. I think lots of you have that maybe in mind. That is something which is, of course, dangerous in terms of no human in the loop. We don't want to harm anyone. So that's something we need to gain more experience. But further down the road, I really can see that as well happening with all the necessary governance, with all the necessary documents and risk precautions. So this is where we're going. Then release letters from doctors is something very interesting, where you also have, again, the human in the loop, but you can already collect all the data and the necessary wordings from the EHR record. And that brings me to smart search on the EHR record. So why should a doctor just scan through thousands of documents, or maybe hundreds, or whatever, while an AI can do that, and then summarize and bring the necessary information to doctors' attention? That's what we're working on.
I mean, that's so exciting, actually. And I love the way you answered that in terms of the different kind of levels of maturity and sophistication in how we will develop more and more use cases, right? And keeping with the theme around safeguards, you mentioned human in the loop, which is an example of a safeguard, right? We keep a human in the loop in some of these use cases, it's a safeguard. But I guess elaborating a little bit more on the topic of safeguards, when you think about these different levels that you've described to us of use cases where we may start at a more basic level around documentation. We may then get more mature and sophisticated as we become more confident around clinical decision support. We start getting into other use cases that you described around release letters, smart searches. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit more around the kind of safeguards that you've already been implementing, whether that's together with Microsoft or independently, but also some of the safeguards that you see having to evolve, right, as we start developing some of these more sophisticated use cases, and all of this, I guess, to ensure the quality of the AI within those use cases and applications.
Absolutely. So one of those, I mean, we saw this from Hadas in the presentation, the safeguards, which are offered by healthcare agents. We have also worked on those, and we are working together with Microsoft in order to leverage their technology as well. The thing is, explainability is important for the doctor. So that's, I think, the most important thing for the doctor. So an AI comes up with some sentence or with some answer, and the doctor needs to understand where this stuff comes from. So where is this really coming from? So in our RAG systems, we have, of course, the citations in evidence attribution, what we've learned today. That is, you cannot circumvent that. And also data grounding. You need to be sure that a system again checks if the facts are real facts or is it a hallucination. That's one of the most big problems at the moment, I would say. But with this data grounding and with the RAG citations, I think we gained a huge level in acceptance and also adoption of those systems. Adoption is something else. We come maybe later to it because that's another important thing we're really investing and working on. So, but of course, that's not only it. You need to think it a little bit broader. As a system provider, we have often the situation that we have systems at a hospital, and they are not really tending to leave the data into the cloud. So that's something we need to overcome to enable it, because we cannot have these agents and this large language models on a local place in the hospital. That's simply, from a technology point of view today, not what we're offering. So therefore, we need anonymization. That's guaranteed anonymization. We need to convince that people that the data is safe. That leaves us with data protection. So with regional data isolation, so it needs to be made sure that patient data in Europe is only staying in Europe, that data patient in US is only staying in US, and so on and so forth. So that are technical safeguards. No one is thinking maybe now, but that's of course super important on a technical level if you offer systems. You need to have this tick in the box. No one talks about it, but that's of course super important. And then there is more as I said, what wants the doctor to see, which is this evidence. And then you have something, of course, a governance board, where you see your use cases from the company perspective, from the clinical perspective, where you say, do we really want to do this? Is this safe for the patient? Do we have enough data in order to provide the necessary information? And that's where everyone needs to think about and also be fair to each one in the implementation project, in a result. What is the expectation? What is the data we are having, and how safe it is to use?
Really comprehensive. Thank you, Andreas. And I would like in a moment to come back to the question around adoption, and I'll bring Sui in at that point to talk about some examples there together with you. But before we go there, I just want to go to something that you started that response with, which was around a statement around explainability. Explainability is important, right? Was your statement. And in some of the safeguards there that you've described, governance, etc. You mentioned a few different safeguards, which took my mind to the topic of AI literacy. And I'd like to come to you, Hadas, first with this question. So, a lot of what Andreas said there in that response requires a certain level of AI literacy. If we don't have that, if there's a void, we start getting fearful, we start making assumptions, right? So explainability is a part of that. But of course, AI literacy, it goes broader than that. So would you be able to give us your perspective on that quite large topic of AI literacy and why it's so crucial for medical professionals, how it's going to impact the role of clinicians in the future, and particularly if some of those clinicians have a role on these governance boards, as an example that Andreas gave there?
Absolutely. This is a very important topic, and indeed, AI literacy is critical for medical professionals. What does it mean? It means medical professionals need to understand AI. Let's just define what AI literacy is. AI literacy means the ability to understand how AI works and to be able to use it, to be able to monitor it, and to be able to look critically in a way that's with some criticism on the AI applications and the results that the AI applications provide. So the doctors, nurses, the medical professionals will need to understand it. What I believe is going to happen in the next few years, given this amazing progress in AI, is that the work of medical professionals will become increasingly sophisticated. They will have a key role in assessing the tools. What tools are right for their organization? What tools are accurate enough? And they will also need to be able to use those tools. So they will have to be hands-on in using those tools. And they need to be able to interpret the AI insights, the AI results. And they will also need to be able to make the right judgment calls. So they will need to understand what the AI system is telling them. They'll need to have a critical eye on it and not just take the AI results as is. So they need to understand how the technology works behind the scene. I believe the American Medical Association president was quoted about a year ago saying that AI will not replace doctors, but doctors who use AI will replace those who don't. And this is probably true. Medical professionals need to understand AI and know how to work with it.
Thank you, Hadas. And staying on the topic of AI literacy, I'd like to jump over to Svi. And if I can get your opinion, because you're in a clinical practice, what is it that you do in your organization to help with AI literacy in the clinical teams?
Yeah, well, I'd like to refer to one thing that was referred earlier in the hallucination part before I answer your question, Audi, if possible, because
Sure.
we're talking about the grounding material and data, which is the AI agent is being trained on, which is highly important. And obviously, all that Adas and Andres said are the most important things. But one thing to me is important as a doctor because medicine is changing all the time. So this grounding material has to be updated all the time. So that's one issue that is important. The other one is the the relevance of the data to the population, because we know that different data sets or different agent that are trained on different population might not be suitable for your own community. So it's very important to see if your AI safeguards are taking control of these issues. And I know that Microsoft, the fact that I was using their products, they certainly do that. And now regarding the AI literacy, I must say that the first thing that we did in our hospital, it was some 5 years ago, is we started buying FDA-approved AI agents and implementing them into our imaging facilities. We were doing that to make sure as many doctors in the hospital are acquainted with this feature. At start, they had a lot of concerns. They didn't actually trust the AI agents. But as time went by, all of them realized how quick and safe these agents are. And I must say, a few months ago, we thought of stopping one of those services, but uh, immediate protest came from our doctors with all of their hearts saying, please do not do that. We need these agents. And I'll refer to that later because there's a danger around this thing. Um, so that was the first thing that we do. And in a matter of a couple of years, I think the AI agents and products were familiar with the doctors. They were familiar with that, and they accepted, and their concerns has been dissolved. And the next thing that we did is we built a community of innovation champions. And right now we have about 100 innovation champions throughout the hospital, and they are dispersed in all the departments of the hospital, and each and every one of them is like our connection to the industry. If a startup comes up and wants to do a collaboration, we need a POC. We take the innovation champions. They've been trained. They've done courses in innovation, in ideation. Some of them go through programming courses, and that allows them to speak the language and to understand the importance. And they're really into it. So these agents in the departments, they do a huge change in the organization. Some of the departments also have AI journal clubs. Some of them are doing staff meetings with demos of AI products for the acquaintance of these products. Some perform studies, and all this together allows my hospital, and I think every hospital should do the same, to make sure that we are ready for the next step, because this is just the beginning. As years go by, AI is going to go throughout all hospitals and throughout all healthcare. And it's going to be important that the doctors are acquainted with it and they know how to use it.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, there's this intersection with literacy and adoption, and I want to come back to that point around adoption, because adoption is essentially, it's a change management exercise, and with any kind of change management exercise, there needs to be awareness, understanding, trust, etc. For successful adoption. So staying with you, Zvi, just for a few more minutes, please. Would you be able to, I guess, share a story, share an example where, you know, you have successfully integrated AI into a clinical pathway, you know, through through the partnership, I guess, with Microsoft. And you described there about from a literacy perspective, how you introduced and exposed clinicians to AI agents. And it would be great to now kind of think about how that literacy helped to also drive adoption, what else you had to do around driving adoption, successful adoption of a specific example where you had to then integrate something and change a clinical pathway.
Yes, I would like to give this explanation. We talked about the parts of the pains in healthcare, and one of the things that I refer to is the patient's journey. And when we set up with Hadass, we were thinking, what can we do together? Which type of agent would like to collaborate in bringing up a new product? So I'll give an example. You probably know the feeling that you go through an imaging exam, and if you're lucky, after a few days, you get the imaging report and you start reading it, and you understand it's written in common doctorish, which is not such an explainable language as a patient. It is for doctors. It's full of buzzwords and medical terms that sometimes the patient doesn't understand. So he sits down with the report and he goes, what about my back pain? What's my next step? So we decided to tackle this problem, and we built an AI agent behind a chatbot that allows the patient to upload the imaging report and start a simple layman conversation using layman terms that any person can understand. This was obviously using safeguards to make sure that there are no clinical or any other problems and hallucinations. And this allowed us to get a product that is great for the patients, but also for the doctors. So we're talking about imaging. Most doctors can understand the imaging report, but how about pathology? I can assure you that many of the doctors, they don't understand how to read a pathology report. Some of them do, but some of it is very, very complex. So I believe this is a huge market. And when you get a report like that, and you can understand, you get the reference to your report, and everything is explanatory. And plus you get recommendation, what's your next step? And perhaps you can create an appointment with a proper orthopedic surgeon. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. It's just for an example. And I talked about our department managers. So obviously our imaging department manager was a big part. Dan Paz, Dr. Dan Paz, hopefully he's in the other audience. He was part of this developing of this product, and we're very proud of our collaboration with Microsoft about it.
Thank you, Zvi. And Andreas, this topic of adoption came up in as part of your earlier response. So is there anything you would like to add before I then also invite Hadass, if you would like to add anything around this point of adoption?
Yeah, adoption is important in terms of how convenient and how safe the system is. This brings us back to the safeguards, explainability, and for the user understanding where the information is coming from. Then it's also simply about practicality. So important here is transaction times. If you have a system thinking for 20 seconds and maybe the doctor is then typing faster than an ambient AI would recognize what the talk is and transcribe it. So that is important from that perspective, that we as a system owner or system house are thinking and also testing really with live data, with people that are using the system, getting the UX experience, and really bring down the response time to the minimum there. So it is practical. And then there is, of course, education. That's what you said, AI literacy. So make it a tool and helping the user, and that you only can get via real trainings. So I have that as well in our company, the adoption of AI, not only for the doctors, but also for the developers is super important. And we need to get that done. And you can only do this by being an advocate. Education, showing use cases, showing the benefits, but also how you deal with the risks. That is super important because everyone knows about the risks and they are concerned, and you need to take that away.
Thank you, Andreas. Hadas, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess I will add to Tzvi's story, just complementing from the implementation side, just to show how a safeguard can be used for risk mitigation. So that use case is something we call patient-friendly reports. You take a medical report that is written in common doctorish, and you want to translate it into layperson terms so that people who don't have a clinical background, that don't understand the medical jargon, will understand the content. But you need to make sure that it kind of reflects the right, like that the answer is, or that the patient version of the data is representative of the original document, and that there are no hallucinations and omissions. And in that case, let's look at a very concrete example, just to illustrate what do we mean when we say being sensitive to the clinical context. Let's say that in the original document, it was written that the patient had family history of malignant carcinoma of the breast. And let's say that in the patient-friendly version, it said that the patient history, like the patient has history, a family history of breast cancer. Is that an hallucination? That's not an hallucination. It's actually the same thing, clinically, or close enough thing to be considered the same, not an hallucination. If the patient-friendly version would have said that this is a skin cancer, yeah, that would have been an hallucination. But saying something with different words doesn't mean that it's a different concept from the clinical perspective. And this is why the hallucinations and omission detection safeguard had to be clinically sensitive and understand the clinical kind of terminology and understand the ontologies to understand that a carcinoma, a malignant carcinoma of the breast, is actually the same thing as breast cancer. So it's not about just comparing the concept. So this is a really nice example of implementation of safeguards to make sure that the patient-friendly version is actually fully representative of the doctor's original letter.
That's really helped, actually. Thank you, Hadas. So I'm conscious of time, and we have around 9 or 10 questions that have come in. So I want to make sure we leave enough time. I do have one more question, and Tzvi, since you are working in a live setting in a clinical practice, I'm going to bring this question to you. I'm sure Andreas and Hadas would have a lot to say about this also, but in the interest of time, I'll point my last question at you, and then we'll go into some of the audience Q&A. So if we zoom out on the bigger picture of clinical AI use cases, what are the unintended consequences that you think we need to consider more carefully and critically? And if I just give some context to this question, we are now living in a world where we are very aware of some of our actions over the decades that have led us to the situation around climate change. We are aware now why we have high levels of obesity, because these are now the consequences of decades worth of decisions that we've taken as society, etc. And so this question is really about propelling ourselves into the future, and then really thinking about what are the unintended consequences that may surface as a result of all of these decisions that we're now taking about how we're using AI. What do we need to consider more carefully and critically, Tzvi?
Right. So I'll try to explain something that to me is I've never heard anything talking about that, anyone, because there are many implications that can happen in the future. But to explain my idea, I'd like to take you to the future, 5 years from now. Dr. Snow is an ER medicine physician, and he's using AI agents for his decision making. And he's being supported by this decision-making software for a few years now. And whenever a patient arrives with a heart attack or something, he sees the ECG, and the AI agent is summarizing all the data and seeing the ECG and telling him, listen, most probably this is acute MI, and you have to do this and that, and this is your recommendation and treatment plan. And the doctor accepts the AI suggestion because he knows how reliable and safe it is. And he keeps on doing it for a few years then. And once that happens, a lot of his tedious time is saved, but his knowledge is deteriorating, and his ability to perform as a physician in the ER without the agent is turning to a challenge. Now, let's see a scenario where a cyber attack hits the AI agent, and then a heart attack, a patient with a heart attack enters the ER. And this physician that did not use or did not practice much of his learning material and experience for the past few years is now under 2 attacks, and he has to make a decision that is life-threatening and life-changing. And I believe that we should tackle this problem in the future. And as AI might create this situation that affects doctors' competency, it can also hold the solution. So imagine yourself if the AI agent has a continuous medical education program for each physician. And now the doctor sits in the ER and he sees the ECG, he gets the recommendation, but it's not in an answer. It has a multiple choice question, and he has to pick it up. And then he's referred to an article to read the newest update on acute MI. And the AI also creates a presentation for him so he can give it to the students. And later on, it can send him a report telling him, listen, you got to go through your ECG again. And this is the course of cardiology I recommend you to do. And the toughest thing about it, that he might send this report to his superior department manager. So I think that the fact that we are going to be dependent on AI agent, even for doctor decisions making, might be a threat on the competency of doctors. And in the scenario of an ER, in the operating theaters, in the intensive care units, in hospitals as a whole, this is unacceptable. So I think regulation needs to be done in order for every AI decision supporting agent to embed into itself an education program for the physician.
Thank you, Svi. That was quite a vision there that you articulated. And with that, let's take it into some of our audience Q&A. We have one question already answered there. So obviously I won't ask that again. Thank you, Hadas, for answering that one. So we have a question, how do hallucinations occur? Shouldn't AI inherently be truthful? And I'd just like to ask the panel, if we keep the answers punchy, we can get through more of them. And then maybe let's just take one of you to answer each one so that we can get through them all. So yeah, how do hallucinations occur? Shouldn't AI inherently be truthful? Who would like to take that one?
I would take that one. It's simple because the AI doesn't understand the context of things. They are just computing always the next word they need to come up with. And so sometimes the computation is just going wrong, and therefore they hallucinate and they think they tell a nice story. but they don't understand what's really going on. They have no idea about physical situations or medical concepts or anything. That's the reason they hallucinate.
Thank you, Andreas. We have a couple of questions from Ram. Ram, I'm just going to take your first one and then we'll come back to your second one if there's time, just so that I can get different questions in. So how do vendors ensure that clinical trials data and best business practices align with US FDA regulatory? Who would like to take that one?
I could take that. I'll answer a bit more broadly. We don't take shortcuts, and it's very typical, being a global company, that we need to do regulatory compliance, not just for the FDA. We have to do regulatory compliance in quite diverse environments for different healthcare systems all around the world. This is part of our programs, part of our compliance programs that we follow. This is inherent in our basic compliance processes. And sometimes what we would do when we have multiple regulatory compliance systems to adhere to, sometimes, actually more typically than not, we would do an all-inclusive, like we would implement it even though it's only required in the US or only required in the EU. A great example for that, by the way, is GDPR. It came from the EU, but we implemented it in our products across the board, no matter where they go to. Sometimes a product behavior and features of a product would differ depending on which geography they're deployed in. So it could be that some features would behave differently because of regulation of that geography or region.
Thank you very much. And Hadass, just to bring to your attention, there is a really specific follow-up question from Ram. So I'm going to move on to some other questions, but if you do get a moment and you want to type an answer to that one, that might be helpful. So Scott is asking, is there any current data on the error rates of existing AI co-pilots, ambient scribes on the market today? I've seen traditional LLMs have error rates of 20 to 25% for clinical data. Who would like to take that one? Or should we take that offline if it requires a little bit of research?
From my side, this requires a little bit of research, but we're offering such a product. So we actually have exactly that situation that we face with clinical terms. But I think Microsoft can answer the question, and we as well. We are training our own models to understand that better, but I can come up with a better percentage, and it's certainly not 22%. It's lower than that, of course.
Thank you, Andreas. So Scott, apologies, we'll have to do a little bit of digging to give you a good answer on that one. Andy is asking, can you elaborate on safeguards around PHIs with co-pilots, LLMs? Who would like to take that one? Hadass.
Yeah, I can take that. We see a lot of need for de-identification of healthcare data. I think Andreas was referring to that need as well. De-identification is not just about erasing PHI. Or like removing the name or removing the identification number or a date from a text. It's much more complicated than that, because sometimes if you de-identify the data by removing the PHI just by scraping it, it makes the data unusable or not understandable, or that data could have been clinically significant. For example, if those are hospitalization and discharge dates, they're actually clinically meaningful. So you have to do the identification in the healthcare space. You have to do it in a smarter way. We realized that when we were building our PHI detector and the identifying service in Azure, and we added what we call surrogation, which is a feature that is, instead of just erasing data, the PHI from the text. It would replace them with surrogates. So it would replace, if there are two dates, one of them is a hospitalization, one of them is a discharge. It wouldn't just erase the dates. It would replace them with dates that are different but shifted, but representing like the similar time span, et cetera. So doing it in a way that doesn't make the data unusable, but still keeps kind of the clinical essence of the data.
Thank you, Hadass. The next question from him, I'm going to suggest that there's an answer typed to that, because I think it will be a fairly kind of straightforward answer. It's regarding how customers can get involved in the private preview. And the context of this is that Microsoft Responsible AI principles are used across the entire suite. Of course, we've only been talking about certain products today. What makes this relevant is that customers are invited to actually become part of the private preview options to use, influence, and contribute to the development. So if it's okay, Hadass, for you to just type an answer to that one around how customers can get involved, that would be awesome. I think that would be helpful for everyone. So thank you, Hema, for that question. We are at time, but if our panel and obviously the audience are happy to stay on for a few more minutes, we can take a couple more questions. We may even get through them. So we'll run to maybe 5 past the hour if we're okay to do that. I'll assume yes, and move on. So at what point does an AI system become a clinical device as per FDA, and where do we draw the boundary? This could be a big question. So if I can just ask the panel to keep it to a really concise answer on this one.
So perhaps I'll relate to that. Well, there's even in Israel, there's a regulation regarding a medical device, and obviously regarding digital medical device. Everything has to go through experiments, and there's a process through the FDA to allow it. I can tell you that the regulation still is not as strict as in pharma, but I believe this is going to change in the next few years, and it's changing rapidly, I think. The need for safety, the need for products to be available, fast, safe, and reliable will have to make some changes. Hadass would like to say something about that. We had a discussion.
Yeah, I definitely can. Regulation is catching up. And we see, with regards to AI as a medical device, we see that regulation is emerging, whether it's the Biden AI Act that will likely be changing, whether it's the European Commission for AI, whether it's even the UN AI recommendations. It's coming along, and it's up to the regulator to decide how to balance that. Where do they draw the line? Where if it's too permissive, there's not enough, a risk of not enough supervision. If it's too strict, it is becoming a blocker or a barrier to innovation. So I guess the jury is still out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to draw it to a close. I was really hopeful because, that we could get through more questions. There are some really great questions here. So thank you to the audience for your engagement. Amazing questions. I think we can all be confident that AI is reshaping clinical practice. How fast we want that to go and how we want that to be safeguarded is down to us, actually. We are the generation that's introducing AI into clinical practice. So I hope we can all take a collective responsibility, to take the steps necessary to ensure that this is ethical, effective, and safe for future generations to come. And with that, I would love to thank this amazing panel. Hadass, thank you for your presentation. Zvi, Andreas, and Hadass, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience with the audience. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you to Microsoft and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at community.hlth to catch up on all Health GoLive webinars and watch the recording of today's session. And join us in Amsterdam June 16th through 19th for Health Europe.